Hello everyone, Bendy Bono here, continuing on in our exploration of the Summa. We are in question 45, the mode of emanation of things from the first principle. This was a 8-article question, so last time we covered articles 1 through 4. This time we'll wrap up with articles 5 through 8. I'll just go ahead and point out that there's a couple places in here, in I believe Articles 6 and 8, where I just flat out didn't really understand a couple of the objections as far as what he was getting at. So I will spend a little less time on those rather than pretending I know what he's talking about with every objection. But I think that I understood most of the main points that he's getting at anyway, so I think we'll still be okay. All right, Article 5. So we've already established that creation, just to go back over our terms here, Aquinas is using to create in the sense of creating something from nothing. We've established that God can do that, okay? But can God alone do that? Well, Aristotle says that what is perfect can make its own likeness. Material things can make their own likeness. Therefore, immaterial things, which are more perfect than material things, can make their own likenesses, which would have to be immaterial substances in their case. And immaterial substances are only made through creation. Therefore, it seems like immaterial things at least can create. The greater the resistance is in the thing made, the more power is required from the maker. Okay, so just to give a quick and dirty example of what he means there, if you want to carve a statue of me, not that you would ever want to do that, but if you did and you wanted to carve that, you will have a far easier time carving it into a block of wood than a chunk of diamond or something, that would offer just more resistance. So that's basically what he's getting at there. The more power is required from the maker. A contrary has more resistance than nothing. Creatures can make from their contrary, from things that they are not. You can make something out of that block of wood or whatever. That block of wood has more resistance than nothing. Therefore, they even more can make from nothing, since nothing offers less resistance, and therefore, according to this objection, requires less power. Created beings are finite, thus only finite power is needed to create them. Alright, but Augustine says angels can't create anything, and therefore much less can material beings. Okay, all being must ultimately come from God, the first principle of being. We've established that many times before. Some held that despite this, secondary beings could create through participation in ultimate being. However, for a being to act in this way, it would have to possess the quality of being able to create. That would have to be endowed in it through its creation, and no creature actually possesses that quality. So there you go. Okay, creatures, we're now into the objections answered. For number 1, creatures create their own likeness, not by producing that nature from nothing, but by applying it to something else, some kind of pre-existing matter. Okay. Number 2, to make something from a contrary is possible because potency exists in that thing. When no potentiality exists, the power required is much greater. Okay, so actually, creating from nothing requires more power because there's no potency in what you are acting on. In other words, to go back to our block of wood analogy, a block of wood seemingly would have the potential to be able to be carved into a figure, whether that figure is of bendy bone or anything else you might envision. But if I tell you, okay, carve a statue of me out of nothing, well, that's much harder to do. That would require more power. Why? Because there's no potency in that thing, in nothing for you to act upon. Okay? And number 3, to create a finite effect requires only finite power when it is being made from something pre-existing. But again, when we start talking about being made from nothing, then infinite power is required to make something from nothing. Okay, whether to create is proper to any person, meaning any person of the Trinity. This is where I was completely lost on objections 1 and 3, so I'll read what I wrote down, but I'm not going to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. The processions of the divine persons are the cause of processions of things. Thus, to create belongs to a person. Okay. The Creed asserts that the Father is the creator of all things, visible and invisible. Okay, that one we can make some sense out of, because that would, the Nicene Creed, right? Which does say that. So that would seem that to create belongs to the Father rather than to the Son and the Holy Spirit. All right. Any mode of causation can only be attributed to one person if it is part of creating according to the relations and processions. Again, didn't understand that. So if you're curious, you can go dip into the Summa yourself and hopefully have more success than I did. All right. Dionysius says that all things are the common work of the whole Trinity. Okay, meaning the creation of all things. All right. To create belongs to God according to his essence. He creates by his essence. Why? Well, it goes back to what we were talking about just a second ago. God is able to create because he is the first principle being. His being itself. That was confusing the way I said that. The fact that he is being itself, he is existence itself, that belongs to his essence. So he creates according to his essence. Therefore, that creation is common to all three persons. However, different causality regarding creation. In other words, the order of how all this works out is assigned to the members of the Trinity. So he would say that the Father creates through his word and his love. And Aquinas goes into a little more detail on how all that breaks down if you are so interested. Okay, objections answered then. The relationship between the processions and the creation is explained in the argument. Okay? All three create, I think is what I meant to say there. But their relations assign an order to that creation, so that it is the Father who creates through the Son and the Spirit. So what the Creed is just acknowledging is the breakdown of causality between the members of the Trinity, even though all three are involved in the act of creation. And then number 3, again, creation relates to the divine attribute of power. Didn't understand it. Okay, move on. Whether in creatures is necessarily found a trace of the Trinity. Okay, objections. The Trinity cannot be traced from creatures is discussed in question 32. Question 32, if you need a refresher, was simply saying that we can't deduce the Trinity apart from divine revelation. Therefore, there is no trace of the Trinity in creatures. Otherwise, this objection is saying if there was, question 32 would be untrue. We would be able to get back to the Trinity just from studying our own nature. Everything in creatures is created. Therefore, if the Trinity is found in every creature, it is found in every property of every creature, and that would seem to go on and on to infinity. Because creatures are created by the essence, not the distinction of the persons, the trace of them that's in them is not of the Trinity, but of the unity of essence. Now that's an interesting objection. Okay? It's basically saying that no, the trace of the divine in creatures is of God as a whole, not of the Trinity, because creation comes from the essence, right? Augustine says, though, that the trace of the Trinity is in all creatures. Argument. In all creatures are found some things that must be reduced to divine persons as their cause. And then he explains the way that this traces back to each of the members of the Trinity. So in every creature, or in every created substance, you can find cause and principle, and that traces us back to the Father, who is the cause of all things and the principle of all things. You can find form and species, which Aquinas ties to the Son. You can find a relation to order, which he ties to the Spirit. Okay. Objections answered. Number 1, we find this trace through appropriating creation in light of divine revelation. In other words, if we go back to those, some of that discussion regarding, okay, we might not be able to get to the Trinity by natural reason alone, but once we have divine revelation, then we can see the Trinity reflected in created things. So Aquinas is still saying, yeah, you're right, we do need divine revelation, but once we have it, then we're able to recognize that trace of the Trinity in all creatures, whereas before we could not. Number 2, the article refers to self-subsisting creatures only. Why? because creation refers to being itself. So having self-subsisting being, that's where the trace of the Trinity is found, not then. Therefore, you don't have to trace it out to every single property of a creature, on and on and on to infinity. Only to the creatures that are self-subsisting beings. In other words, if I cut off my hand, which I would not do, there's not a trace of the Trinity in my hand. It's not a self-subsisting being, right? So it's not like, oh, well, there's a Trinity in this finger, no, and then in every cell of this finger, and then in every atom, blah, 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 on to infinity. It's a no, it's in the self-subsisting being of Bendy Bono as a whole, right? And the reason there's a trace of the Trinity in me is because I have being, I have existence, in a way that if I cut off my hand, it doesn't. Okay? And then the article shows how the processions, the divine relations, are reflected in the creature. Therefore, it is proper to say that it's the trace of the Trinity in creatures, in creatures rather than the unity of essence. All right, finally, is creation mingled with works of nature and art? Do we see it there as well? Okay, some form is produced in every operation of nature and art. This production does not involve matter, therefore it is creation. Didn't quite understand his logic there, but we'll roll with it. Number 2, in natural things, the only agent is the accidental form. Therefore, the substantial form of the thing must be produced by creation. In nature, like begets like. Some things in nature are generated by things unlike them. Thus, creation is involved in producing their form. If creation is not involved in nature, then what nature produces is not a creature, and that can't be. That would be heretical, according to Aquinas. All right, but because, so basically what this is acting is like, through something like reproduction or through a work of art, is creation involved in that? Well, Augustine says no, and he's going to distinguish propagation, which would be those kind of works of art and nature, from creation itself. Okay, so he's saying all forms that art and nature produce pre-exist in matter in a state of potentiality. I'll add that in there just to make it a little clearer, right? So what nature does is compose from those forms, but it does not create them. In other words, the forms that nature, art, and all that act upon already exist within the material that is involved in what nature and art are doing. So there is no creation involved. The form of that thing isn't being brought into existence by nature or art. Rather, it is pre-existing in the matter of that thing through the potentiality within that matter. Okay. Objections answered. The forms are actually made through the production of art. Those forms are made actual through, they're made actual rather than potential through the production of art and nature, but they are not created. Nature acts according to pre-existing forms. I didn't really understand his reply to objection 3 at all, but this seemed to be maybe sort of kind of the gist of it, or I could be completely wrong. Similar answer to number 2. And then number 4, nature only acts on the presupposition of created principles, thus its products are still called creatures because it's acting on matter, forms, states of potentiality that are already that have been created. Okay. All right, so that wraps up question 45. Next one is a nice short 3-article question, so I'll be back in a few days with that one. Until then, I'm Bendy Bono. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.